Welcome to the continuation of In Divine Friendship. And we will start with a prayer, and then we'll have a little bit of chanting and a few moments of meditation before we go to the book. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to attune ourselves to your inward pleasant presence, that we may know that you are always with us. Leave us never alone with our own thoughts and our own feelings, without the presence of your loving guidance behind us. Help us to know in every way that we are loved, that who we are is more than enough, and that we are loved simply for who we are, not for what we accomplish or what we do or don't do, but merely because we are your children. Guide us and bless us, and bring us home to thy eternal bliss. Om. Peace. Amen. So, a little chanting and a little meditation.
Lotus feet If you want to cross the ocean of delusion, shaming the white lotus in purity, shaming the white lotus in purity, beyond all duality, Guru, image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Guru, image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Guru, image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Thinking in thy heart, lotus feet of thy Guru. Thinking in thy heart, lotus feet of thy Guru. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Amen. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Amen. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Amen. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Amen. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Om. Shri Guru Deva Amen. Shri Guru Deva
We'll meditate now for a couple of minutes. Om, peace. Amen. Before I start in on the class, I want to say that this is the end of December. No, excuse me, the end of November. And it's my habit to take off from teaching the month of December because Well, we usually have an extremely busy Christmas season. This year is going to be a little different, but it's still busy, and in the spirit of Christmas, it's always nice for me. This is totally just for me to have a change of energy and be able to focus more on the holidays. So, after this class, we won't reconvene until January 12th, because the first Tuesday in January is Master's birthday, January 5th. And the other thing is, I just want to share with you this nifty item that was recommended to me by my friend Ambaro, which is basically a huge magnifying glass, which solves the problem of having to take my reading glasses on and off, which has been a bit of a bother ever since I started doing these books with this tiny little print. So I think actually it's out of camera range where I'm holding this magnifying glass, but the result is I can read and speak without having to do all that fiddling. So reading glasses on camera are a thing of the past. I just wanted you to know that. So we are actually in the middle of a letter that was October 31st of 2001. And it started out, a devotee, this is a summary of the letter that was written to Swami. A devotee wrote that St. Francis and Therese Neumann say they had visions of Christ's birth and that he didn't have a physical birth, but manifested as light. Were these true visions? What about other avatars like Krishna and Yogananda? So Swami answered very interestingly, but you'll have to look at the class before this one in order to find out. I'm going to keep it a secret from you. But there's 2 more interesting paragraphs to this letter, so let's do it. Master had a vision once in which the Divine Mother told him, I have suckled thee through the breasts of many mothers. This time, she who suckled thee was I myself. His mother then was no ordinary woman. And yet Master never suggested to us that his birth, viewed from the physical point of view, wasn't in full accordance with natural law as God has established it. So there's a little bit of conversation about Master's mother, which I'll go into because it's very interesting. Master's mother, let me hold this in my thought for a minute. A number of years ago, and it would have been at least 15 or 20 years ago at least, when Swamiji first sort of talked about this, and it's not clear to me now where this vision of Master took place when Divine Mother spoke to him. Perhaps it's in the autobiography, but I'm not exactly sure where it is. But when Swamiji focused in on that, which of course what happens to all of us is that there's so much that comes through this path that we sort of understand a piece and then we understand another piece and then something comes into focus. You've certainly heard me in the course of actually all the classes that I give based on Swamiji's writings especially. I will often say, oh, I've heard that many times, but I never thought about it before. So for some reason, a period of time ago, and as I say, it could have been as long as 20 years ago, I'm actually just trying to think that through for a minute. I was trying to think where I was living when this happened, but now I can't recall. When Swami talked about Master's mother like this, he made the suggestion that it was possible that as we move into Dwapara Yuga, that Master's mother would become more and more of a spiritual focus, which is actually a very interesting thought because she really is way in the background. There's no, beyond the stories and autobiography, beyond Master's extraordinary devotion to her, his talking about how much she inspired him and so many aspects of it, it's hardly as if she herself is an independent spiritual figure. But when Swamiji said that, I thought, because I tend to pick up these things really quickly, I think I'm an early adopter, I think is that the word they use in the tech world? And I thought, well, if Swami wants to put Master's mother forward more in a spiritual way, then let's cooperate with it. And we had this beautiful photograph, which was actually a photo of a photo that hangs at 4 Garpar Road, which was is still the Ghosh family home, where Master meditated in the attic room and a certain amount of the drama of his childhood took place. This was all before the internet, when things were much harder to obtain. When we visited there on our pilgrimages starting in 1986, we took a beautiful photograph of the photograph, and it became the classic picture of Master's mother that circulates all through Ananda. It's probably an autobiography of a yogi, but it's just sort of the picture that goes through Ananda. And so I took that picture, we took that picture, and we reproduced it, and we wanted to give it out as a Christmas present, because often every year we would give a Christmas present that was some significant spiritual picture that people might not always have in their hands. So we were prepared to do this. I don't know if we'd even copied the pictures or not, the 100 or so that we would give away. And I was trying to write something to tape onto the back of the picture, because this was our practice. We had a picture of the Biltmore Hotel where Master had his Mahasamadhi, or the the Mandir where Sri Yukteswar's body is buried, or we were allowed once to take pictures upstairs in Mount Washington, just sort of fluky. We were allowed to do that. They don't usually let people take pictures, but accidentally they gave us permission. So we had this picture of Master's shoes tucked under the edge of his bed with gardenia on it. And there would always be some explanation behind it of where it was and what it was. So just as a matter of course, I'm trying to write out this verse of something to explain why we're giving out this picture of Master's mother. And I just couldn't write it. And I believe the way the sequence went, that I called Swamiji and asked him how I should articulate it. I think I asked him. But in any case, I end up on the phone with him, and he said, basically, I've been reconsidering this, and he said, I don't think it's time to put this forward. It wasn't that he said it wasn't the right idea to put this forward. He said, but I don't think it's the right time to put this forward. And I think he may have called me to tell me that, because I remember saying back to him, I wondered why I was having so much trouble writing just a simple statement about why we were putting this picture out. It's just very interesting how sometimes when we meet a block, the necessity is to put out more willpower and more clarity to overcome it. But sometimes when we meet a block, something is trying to be said to us. And it was bewildering to me why I couldn't write 3 sentences to explain why we were giving away this picture. But Swami said it just isn't time to do it yet. So even though the picture is here and there around Ananda, what Swamiji was proposing that we do, he said it wasn't time. But here it is right here. I have suckled thee through the breasts of many mothers. This time it was I myself. This is what Divine Mother says to Master. And Master's mother was obviously a very saintly woman, but she gave birth in a natural way to 8 children. Master writes in Autobiography of a Yogi that my parents, I think he puts it delicately, lived together as man and wife or something like that, once a year, entirely for the purpose of conceiving children. In other words, they had a non-physical marriage, except when it was time to conceive another child, and then they would have marital relations in that way. So it's just, she's living among us, birthing all these children, being an ideal wife and a dedicated mother. But she tells Master, I was Divine Mother myself came to you. Very interesting, isn't it? A lot of times spiritual traditions are the inspiration of a certain saint. It's by no means that during the avatar's life, every aspect of that teaching, every potential of what they're doing comes forth, because the disciples themselves have to grow by having new inspirations. The habit of celebrating the birth of the baby Jesus by reenacting it as a live creche was an inspiration of St. Francis. And it wasn't done until he wanted to celebrate with his monks and to create something beautiful that would inspire them with the miracle of the birth of Jesus. So it was he who began to celebrate it in that way by reenacting that birth. And so the time will come, I mean, seemingly the time will come when a saint will have a holy inspiration, or Master's mother will begin to visit this world in some form. She herself will speak. You really don't know. In the course of visiting the Holy Land, there's in the church, which has been built over the Holy Sepulchre, there is a downstairs chapel, which is a very wonderful vibration, which it's St. Helena's chapel. And St. Helena was the mother of the Emperor Constantine. And Constantine, about 300 years after Jesus' passing, converted to Christianity and converted his whole country, made his whole country Christians. As Swami says, mass conversion is not true conversion. But nonetheless, he made Christianity the religion of his country. And that was the point at which the persecution stopped and it became, a mainstream life to be dedicated to Christ. And his mother, St. Helena, went to the Holy Land and built a number of churches. The church built over the cave where Jesus was born was built by her. I think it was torn down and rebuilt, but it was built at that time. And she came and she wanted to find the cross on which Jesus had been crucified. This is only 300 years after his crucifixion. And so she was divinely led to an old cistern in which several crosses were found. And the pieces of them were taken, and one of them consistently created miracles. And St. Helena and others determined that it was the phrase they use as the true cross. And so that cistern, which was a grotto, was right there, it's right where Jesus was crucified, the hill where he was crucified, and this grotto are steps away from each other. And so it's conceivable after Jesus was crucified that, the crosses were just thrown down in this cave, essentially. And pieces of it were divided up and sent everywhere. I don't think there's any of it left there. But it's this room. But nobody knew about it. Nobody had the cross where Jesus was crucified until this very saintly woman had the divine vision to be able to find it. I mean, that's just one of countless examples. And St. Francis is instituting the live creche and so on. Things happen over time, and the inspirations are there. Now, in the life of Christ, Mary was profoundly revered, and after Jesus was crucified, she was essentially the center of the disciples' work, of the apostles. She was the point that held everyone together. And it was time for her passing. They came to be with her because she was recognized, even during Jesus' life, for the role that she played, in stark contrast to Master's mother, who passed away even when he was a child. But we never know. There's divine mysteries that just wait to be revealed when the time is right and when the world needs that kind of inspiration. The apparitions of Mother Mary have been happening quite regularly, but they only started a few centuries ago. It wasn't common, and when Mary came, now, am I accurate in that? I think I have to withdraw that because I'm not entirely certain. I know she came to North America a few centuries ago, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico, when she appeared to one of the native peoples there and caused a huge conversion to the devotion to Jesus because of her appearance. So her presence awoke people to the possibility of devotion to Jesus, and many of those people became Catholics at that point. And it was considered many different things of importance at that time. But all I'm saying is that things can happen, true things happen, in Divine Mother's time as the planet evolves and as new and refreshing energy is required. One of the reasons that Master incarnated both as William and also as King Ferdinand III was because it was necessary to strengthen devotion to Jesus, and actually through the Catholic Church, because that was what it was at that time. It was very important to strengthen devotion to Jesus. And it was a warlike time, and he had to be a king and a warrior. But what he was really doing, William's primary work was to strengthen the church. And Ferdinand's primary work was to keep Spain, he was the king of Spain, keep Spain for Jesus and not let it be taken by the Moors and then taken away from devotion to Jesus. I guess so what I'm saying is there's a lot more going on than we know. And we just have to always be interested and open. There's a tradition that Swami would talk about sometimes that it's not enough to be devoted, backwards in time to the founding energy. One also has to be in tune with the most recent saints. That doesn't mean just because it's new, it's better, but one has to also be open to the idea that true revelation is constantly renewed, and that's actually what Master's mission is. Master's mission is to restore the original teachings of Krishna and the original teachings of Jesus, and to show that through the teaching of self-realization, which is moksha as the goal of life, divine freedom as the goal of life, both of them, the teachings are the same. And Yogananda was born in 1893. He lived in Los Angeles and died in 1952. Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. But here Master is coming to say, I'm renewing this teaching. I'm bringing Jesus to us again. Autobiography of a Yogi. And in the Festival of Light, Swami has us repeat every week. Jesus appeared to the great Master Babaji and said, we need help. We have to send a messenger to the West. Yogananda is that messenger. And so it's just like, it doesn't stop. It's not like the tradition is fixed and this is it. Now, in contradiction to this, sometimes theologians and academicians are constantly correcting the Master. And you have to be a little suspicious of that kind of correction. That's why in the book, Revelations of Christ, the entire premise of that book is, who is qualified to speak for the saints? And Swamiji says, those who share their consciousness and no one else. An academic degree, a theological degree, a position in an institution, having lots of other people agree with you, none of that is a valid credential for speaking on behalf of the Masters. You have to share their consciousness. And thus, Yogananda, by extension in what Swami is saying, he has the right to speak. So it's all very delightfully interesting. So moving right along, then the last paragraph of this letter, Swami writes, I've heard that when they were making the movie Gandhi, about the nonviolent liberation of India, that great movie, a group of Gandhi's followers insisted vehemently that it would be sacrilegious to portray him in any way other than as a beam of light. That no actor could dare to play Mahatma Gandhi. He had to be portrayed as a beam of light. This is the sort of silliness one wants to avoid. Stated that way, of course, it looks ridiculous, but it's easier than you might think to fall into errors of this sort. Even the Gnostics, wise as many of them were, appear to have erred along these lines in denying any physical reality to Christ's suffering on the cross. So, of course, Swami's throwing in something that he presumes his reader, the recipient of this letter, knows something about. After, in the first centuries after Jesus' passing, there were actually two very strong among others, but there were many strains of Christ's teaching. It had not yet all amalgamated into what became the Catholic Church. And the two primary strains were what became the Catholic Church and the Gnostics. And the Gnostics proposed a far more mystical approach to spiritual life. In his book, A Place Called Ananda, which is about to be reissued, and it's called something like Individuals. It has something to do with individuals and institutions. It has a new name. But one of the later chapters in that book is called Karmic Patterns or something like that. And because that book is about Master's work and whether or not an institutional approach to Master's work is better than an individual inspiration approach. Ananda represents the individual inspiration approach. Every disciple has an equal both a right and a potential to attune himself to the Guru and speak for the Guru. That doesn't mean that every disciple does truly speak for the Guru, but every disciple can speak for the Guru. And the institutional approach taken by Master's organization is that authority passes down in a line, and those who are authorized are the ones who have the right to speak about what the Master wanted. That's basically the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the Pope is the one who decides what Catholicism is and isn't, and the Pope traces his authority all the way back to St. Peter. As Swami said, they conveniently ignore the times when there were two popes and that things were confused, but nonetheless, they say it's a straight line of authority, directly from Jesus to the present Pope. And, Self-Realization Fellowship is in the early stages of it, but, there was Master, then there was Rajasi, then there was Dhyamata, we're all direct disciples. Now we're with Brother Chidananda, who never met Master, but he was close with Daya, who met Master. And so it keeps going in a line like that. Swami's point of view, Swamiji, of course, was a direct disciple and did know Master himself, is that it's not a question of institutional lineage, it's a question of individual attunement. This is the tradition of India. India, they don't try to fix it into some kind of a system. If the divine is present, people recognize it and respond to it. And if the divine is not present, people recognize that and don't respond to it. So it's a very different way of looking at it. But in the time of Christianity, the Gnostics and what became the Catholic Church were competing for whose way was going to be the right way. And the Gnostics were much more mystical. But they also, as Swami said, even the Gnostics, wise as many of them were, appear to have erred along these lines in denying any physical reality to Christ's suffering. As Swami put it, there were Gnostics and then there were Gnostics, meaning it wasn't a uniform group, and some of them were wiser. To deny any physical reality to Jesus is exactly what Swami's saying, where you have to make Gandhi a beam of light. You can't make him a human being at all. Where there's just this desire or a misunderstanding among the disciples, because it's very, very difficult to reconcile the physical reality of an avatar with the divine state of consciousness that he also has. Swamiji himself said to us, most interestingly, he said, I know you all think it would have been better for you to have been able to be a direct disciple and be with Master. I mean, one sort of thinks that one is missed out if one didn't get to do that. Of course, if it was better, your karma would have taken you there. That's the first answer. But Swami had said something very interesting. He says, in many ways, it's easier for you. He said, because you've only known Master as his consciousness. He said, for me, he said, I knew that Master was God incarnate. I knew that his consciousness he was God realized. He was the divine, the full manifestation of the divine. But he was also in the next room having dinner. He said, and Swami said sometimes his mind would just sort of crack. He just didn't know how to put these two realities together. So especially after the Master has passed from the earth and one is not confronted by his physicality, then the mind and the spirit, even for good intention, begins to try to just make it all fit together. And that's why Swami says it's easier than you think to sort of fall into something that is ridiculous on the face of it, But it doesn't seem so because you're trying to find a way to put all of this together. Sanatana Dharma makes it work, but even still, I mean, the number of times I have tried to explain, Swami has tried to explain, and which is a fraction of the times I've tried to understand, how can someone be completely human and completely divine? And it's not easy to explain, and thus, when I started this section, this is how all these myths grow. We're trying to say something that we've experienced. I lived, in close association with Swamiji for many, many years. And my very first meeting with him, I just experienced an extraordinary consciousness that I never experienced anywhere else. And I continued to experience that all the way through. In fact, in my book, Light Bearer, at the beginning, just the little introduction before the book itself starts is this conversation I had with Swamiji in 2011. And when people ask me, has Swamiji changed since I met him? And this was a conversation I had with Swami because I often had to speak for him. And I learned to trust my intuition. But part of the reason I trusted my intuition is I was able to check my intuition with Swamiji. Have I understood correctly? So in this context, I was talking to Swami, and it was important to me. Sir, people ask me if you've changed since I met you in 1969. I said, my answer is no, because the first time I saw you, I'm speaking to him now, I felt that your consciousness had no boundaries. And I have experienced you in that way ever since, every day since then. Nothing has diminished that perception, and everything has reinforced it. I said, however, the way you express yourself, however, is quite different, because I felt that for many years, Swami put a veil over that consciousness because he had a lot of work to do, and it wasn't time. I said, more recently, I feel like you've taken that veil off, but I don't feel like you have changed. But what has changed is the way you show yourself to the world. I said, may I say that? Because there are two questions I always had to ask Swami. One is this true? And the second is, will you let me say it? Earlier in 2006, when I wrote Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, I had a story in there about Swami taking the karma of others onto his body. And it was what he said to me perfectly directly, and he never disputed that he said it, but he refused to allow me to print it. He said, it's not something I should, he said, maybe I did say it, but it's not something I should say about myself, and it's not something I want published. After he died, when I wrote Light Bearer, I felt that it was perfectly fine to say all of that. So with Swami, I had to say, there's two questions, is it true and may I say it? Yes, he said, you may, because it is true. Just simply like that. Now, the end of all of this is, because I was in close association with him in all kinds of circumstances, I was always having to think through, how does extraordinary elevated spiritual consciousness express in human life? And it expresses far more naturally and far more completely than we first think it, than our first idea of it is. That's the only way I can put it. And Master, even about Jesus suffering on the cross, Master said, how would it have served if Jesus didn't suffer? If God can just descend and live the human life, but never actually enter into any aspect of human life, what kind of an example is that? Because all the rest of us are bound. So it's not that, Master said, it's not that Jesus didn't suffer, meaning it's not that his body wasn't crucified, but it was the way he was able to relate to the experience. And those words are inadequate because I don't know how to say it. But what I saw in Swamiji was the feelings that went through Swamiji when he was betrayed and when he was disappointed and when he was making an effort that wasn't appreciated, or when he was exalted and things were going beautifully. It all went through him. My friend Mickey Singer, the man I call him my friend, but he doesn't know me from a hole in the wall. So Mickey Singer, who's an author who wrote some wonderful spiritual books, Michael Singer, he spoke about a great spiritual teacher in America who went through a very, very difficult time with betrayals and disappointments. And his phrase was, it wasn't so much that this guru was going through a hard time, is that a hard time was going through him. And I thought that was a brilliant articulation of it, because that's what I watched with Swami. Many hard things, every aspect of human life went through Swamiji. He was having the whole experience, but he was always a container holding the experience rather than the experience defining him. In other words, that was the state of his consciousness, but he had descended all the way to human life. And so this is where the masters feel, Swami feels, it's a misstatement of what Jesus experienced to say that it didn't really happen. Masters say it had to happen, or else it wouldn't be an example for us. The image many of you have heard me use is we're all in maximum security prison, and we're all bound by the rules of maximum security prisons. And an avatar just walks in and just assumes all the same conditions that we have to live in, and is subjected to all the conditions that we have to live in. But he's innocent. And he just shows us how to be imprisoned in the material world without ever losing your freedom. And of course, that's a very subtle thought. So that, I think, is enough on that particular letter. Swami says, I hope this is of some help at least, because Swami knows too how complicated these are. Okay, the next letter was written in 1975. And the person who wrote to Swami asked about a book that compared Yogananda unfavorably to Ramana Maharshi. For some reason, there must have been somebody in one of Ramana Maharshi's devotees, or for some reason, who felt the necessity to prove his own guru's greatness over Yogananda. Yogananda visited Ramana Maharshi's ashram in 1935 when he was on his way. No, of course, he was in India. When Master was in India in 1935-36, he went to visit Ramana Maharshi, who had an ashram in southern India. And Ramana Maharshi was an exceedingly austere yogi. And as a very young man, he was still, I think he believed he was still in school, and he was studying for his exams, and he just had this revelation of an entirely different consciousness and a reality than the ordinary life he was living. He basically walked out of his home and never went back. Although eventually his mother came to live with him, so he had some connection to his people. But he just, as a young man, he went and started meditating under a tree and in a cave, and gradually the power of his spirituality attracted people to him, and he went to this cave on this mountain, Arunchala mountain, and the mountain itself is considered to be an incarnation of Shiva. It's a very holy and marvelous place, and for a long time he lived in a cave up on the mountain, and then he came down, and an ashram was built at the base of the mountain, and he basically was there. He was often in silence. He was very austere. Most pictures of him you see, he's just wearing a loincloth or a shawl around his shoulders, and he was often immobilized in meditation. And there's a film clip which you can find on the internet of Master's visit to Ramana Maharshi. And it's very funny because Ramana Maharshi is just sitting there, and his head is at a slight angle, and I think he was just in some high state of meditation, and Master's sort of bustling around and arranging people to have their pictures taken and so on, and the whole time Ramana Maharshi is just sitting there. I've been to the ashram. I never met Ramana Maharshi, but I did study his teachings before I found Swamiji. And his teachings, not surprisingly, are also quite austere. Just very the kind of realize God sort of teaching. Just ask who I am and then realize who I am. And what was I going to say about that? But I visited his ashram, and it's magnificent. It's a magnificent place to visit. So now this person is asking Swamiji about this. Swami says, I'm familiar with the book you quote from. In fact, I have a copy of it myself. And then Swami says, Master's humility was so great that he often asked saints questions, as though he himself were a seeker. He did not have to ask for the Maharishi's advice. He had himself attained a higher state, for that saint, great as he was, still has, Master told me, some karma to work out from the past. Still, I should add that even a Jivan Mukta, as he was, is God realized already, and in that sense has already reached the pinnacle of achievement. In God, all are one. This is this confusion that our poor little minds just don't know what to do with. A Jivan Mukta is someone who, Jiva is the individual spirit. Jivan Mukta means freed while living. And I think earlier, when we were in an earlier section of this book, we were talking about Jivan Muktas and siddhis and avatars and, ascended masters and descended masters. So we went all through it at that point. But Ramana Maharshi was a Jivan Mukta. Now, a Jivan Mukta still has some karma to work out. Now that all of a sudden sounds like, oh, he must be in delusion. But this is this strange, I say strange because I just don't know how to think about it, where a Jivan Mukta is fully God realized, but has not yet dissolved all the lingering impressions of the incarnations he's had, although, Swami writes, at any point the Jivan Mukta could dissolve that karma, but Master said sometimes he just lets the karma run because it gives him a way to keep coming back and helping his disciples. Because Swami asked Master, of all the saints you met, and he asked specifically about different ones, who was fully self-realized? And very few. They're great masters, but in our minds we just don't know what we're talking about. So Ramana Maharshi was fully God realized, but he was a Jivan Mukta, not a Siddha, I guess you would call him. I don't know what to think about it. But anyway, Master himself said that a great master works quantitatively as well as qualitatively. The quantitative good that he does is through his general teachings. The qualitative is not only directly to intimate disciples, but also working from within souls of sincere seekers everywhere. That's just, such teaching is not instruction en masse. Of course, it should be noted that where Master's teachings are extremely diverse, the Maharishis are practically unvarying. The real individual instruction of the devotee, which he certainly gave to his disciples, was the infusion into the soul of inspiration within, of divine power to progress spiritually. Now this is really so the qualitative good that a master does is by working from within the souls of sincere seekers everywhere. Swamiji said when he would lecture to a crowd, he would feel that he was lecturing to Master. And when he would first explain this, he would make it clear it wasn't that he felt his guru needed instruction, but what he felt was that Master was present inside of every person that Swami was speaking to. And Swami was trying to, but when he said Master was present, it's not this like picture of this Bengali person, in his dhoti sitting inside of every person. It's the spirit of awakening. It's the potential God realization. What Master being present in everyone means the potential for self-realization is there, and that through Master's influence, the power of that potential will awaken within a person, and we will become motivated to seek God, and the power to receive that will be awakened within us. And so Swami said what he would be doing would be trying to awaken that divine spirit in everyone that he was speaking to. He would be assisting Master in that awakening. So when he talks about the qualitative aspect of the Guru, it's the transforming effect he has on individuals. It's not that he sold 1 million books or anything like that. I mean, it's good to spread the teachings because people will find it and awaken. But it's when people become receptive that Master is really able to come in and transform consciousness. And that's when the real change happens. That's why St. John said, as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. John was speaking of Jesus, but he was talking of the Christ consciousness manifested through these great masters. So this is what Master did. And he says here, that Master's teachings were extraordinarily diverse, and Swamiji carried all that out. Swami often made the contrast. He said Master's realization was so complete that he didn't have to in any way isolate or protect himself from the world. Master, came to the West. He traveled all over America. He traveled in Europe. He traveled in India, and he just lived among people and interacted with all kinds of people and never set himself apart in any way. Now, Ramana Maharshi had a very different mission, but part of the reason that Ramana Maharshi held himself in such an austere way, Master said, or Swami said, is because of Ramakrishna's, it was necessary for him to be like that. Whereas Master, as a descended Master, there was no need for that. Who's to say? I feel like it's my belief that Swami also was a Jivan Mukta, and Swami lived just as Master lived, completely naturally, completely free in the world. And Swami was following in the footsteps of his Guru. Everything Swami did, he did because Master did it. But there's this, in Narayani's book about Swamiji, My Heart Remembers Swami Kriyananda, at the end of that book, she talks about this saintly sadhu that knew Swamiji in India in the very last year of Swami's life. And that sadhu said to Narayani and Shurjo, "You have no idea what you have in Swamiji." And the sadhu said, I keep myself at a great distance from people because I need to hold my energy in. I can't mix with people without losing. He said, Swamiji allows, as he put it, he allows anyone to touch his feet. He said, you have no idea. You have no idea what kind of power has to be present for a spiritual being to be so free among people. Now, I'm not going to make comparisons because I am so not absolutely zero qualified to do it. And God has played through each one as God wants to play. But Swami points out that Ramana Maharshi's teachings was very focused. And because before I found Swamiji, among those I studied and learned about was Ramana Maharshi. I had a very warm, I loved the story of his life. It was just thrilling, and I was thrilled when I finally went to his ashram. It was just a wonderful experience. But the teaching was very austere and very direct. It didn't have a lot of room for cooperative communities and householder communities and education for life for children. It was just much more, just this is what we do and this is what we do. But Swami wants to say that his real work was not the teaching that he wrote or spoke. His real work was awakening his individual disciples and devotees to the presence of God within him, the transformation of consciousness. That's all that matters. I've just started reading an interesting book. Unfortunately, the name of it escapes me at this moment. It's Transcendent something. It's an autobiography of Swami Gyanananda. Swami Gyanananda, who was a contemporary of Swami Kriyananda's, and he's passed away from this world some years ago, but not very long ago. And he was a Swiss, and in Switzerland he was a very serious seeker, and he was maybe 20 or 21, and he found Autobiography of a Yogi, I believe, or he finished reading it on March 7th, 1952, the day that Master left his body. So just as he became aware of Master's presence and felt drawn to follow him, Master left this world. So Yogananda, as a young man, just started walking to India. And he walked from Switzerland to India. And when he got to the border, they asked him, this is how the story is told, why have you come? He said, to find God. And they just opened the border and let him walk right through, and he never left. And he took sannyas. At some point, I will know more about his story later. I met him in his later years. He lived up in Dehradun, and when we would go to India, we would usually visit him. But the whole point of this, and I've read 10 pages of his book so far, but there's sort of a disclaimer at the beginning, which is very interesting. And he's just really talking about, basically, this is the story of one individual, but it could be the story of any individual. And the theme, as he's expressing it, is because every individual's story ends in the same place. It ends in God realization. And every individual's story ultimately is the end of separateness and the merging into the one. So he has this beautiful articulation in there where he says, the specific events of this particular life are told here because that's what happened, but it could be a completely other series of events. It could be any events at all, because the only point of those events is the God realization that comes at the end. And it was of course, he's Yogananda, so he's wisdom-oriented. That's his orientation. It's that kind of gyan just denies the reality of the dream world. But it was so perfect. Everybody's story ends the same. These are the events that led to the end of my story, but it could be any series of events because we all end up at the same place. And it's so Ramana Maharshi goes through one route, Master goes through another route, and every disciple has to awaken to wherever it is they're trying to go. I mean, whatever route they're going to take in order to end up at God realization. Because we are individual, but in the end, it all merges into that simplicity. It's absolutely wonderful. There's so many facets to the diamond. And this is where Swami, it's like, why would anybody want to compare? What difference does it make? We find the path that works for us and we follow it. And the closer we get to the goal, the more obvious it is that it never made any difference anyway. So this is the real teaching of the Guru, and seems to have been misunderstood by the translator on that occasion. Swami's back to this book, in which Master was unfavorably compared to Ramana Maharshi. It seems to have been misunderstood by the translator on that occasion, or by the less evolved disciples around that great Guru. Otherwise, quite obviously, the saints all say the same basic truths. None of them say, for instance, that we should be dishonest or untruthful. Certain basic teachings are universal the world over. True saints, beholding God in all, bow to the divine qualities they see expressed in one another in divine friendship. In other words, Swami is saying they're not competing with each other. Why bother? Why would their disciples want to do that? There's an amusing story told about Anandamoyi Ma. Anandamoyi Ma was this great woman saint. She died in 1982, I believe, at a relatively elderly age, in her 80s, I think. And there was another great woman saint alive at the same time who was a French woman. They called her the Mother, and she was the companion of Sri Aurobindo at the ashram, wherever they had. And after Aurobindo went into seclusion and later passed, the Mother became the spiritual leader of that ashram. And on some occasion, I don't know why, the details are not clear to me, but Anandamoyi Ma and a group of her disciples, Anandamoyi Ma and the mother met. And there were the groups of disciples were there. And apparently there was a moment where they were staring into each other's eyes, and then Anandamoyi Ma looked away. And afterwards, there was a big kerfuffle because all of the mother's disciples were saying that, you know, the mother's gaze was too intense and Anandamoyi Ma had to turn away. And so there was this big kerfuffle. Our mother is better than your mother sort of thing. And Anandamoyi Ma she said two things about it. First, she said, yes, I did look away because I saw someone come in and I wanted to make sure they had a place to sit. So I was trying to make sure that they were taken care of because she was very attentive. And then she said, and if the mother had looked away, wouldn't you also be talking just as her disciples are talking now? Meaning, really, it was nothing, but you would have just grabbed it just as much as they grabbed it. Like, what are you all trying to do? True saints, beholding God in all, bow to the divine qualities they see expressed in one another. So, by all means, avoid this kind of foolishness. So, this is written in 2003. Asked if Yogananda gave his unconditional love to all his disciples. This actually came out of a sort of an interesting conversation that Swami was having, Swamiji would reflect all through his life. He reflected on the things that happened to him when he was with Master. And Swamiji came to Master on September 12, 1948. On that day, Swamiji was accepted as a disciple and initiated as a disciple and as a monk. And Master asked of Swamiji unconditional obedience, which, as Swami tells the story, he at first hesitated out of complete sincerity. What if I think you're wrong, he said to Master. Master said, I will never ask anything of you except what God tells me to ask. And Swami said, well, then I give you my unconditional obedience. And then Master said to Swamiji, I give you my unconditional love. And asked, will you give me your unconditional love? And Swami said, without any hesitation. He said yes to that. Then much later, at least much later when he started talking about it, like after the year 2000, Swami said, I don't think that was common. I don't think Master said that to everyone. And Swami sort of didn't quite know what to do with that. And that's part of where this letter comes out of. Asked if Yogananda gave his unconditional love to all disciples. And Swami says, of course he gives his unconditional love to everyone. But I think there was also a deeper kind of bond, a promise to follow through to the end with the disciples he took on. Strange that I never looked into this when I was there. I just couldn't say to someone, he gave me his unconditional love. Did he give it to you too? And then, if the answer was yes, to go on canvassing others. Still, from what he said about Smith, Reverend Smith, in answer to someone's question, this was a man that Master had put in charge of one of the churches, and then actually later left the work. And Swami said at the time that what I'm about to quote took place, many people, it was all of Swami's experience with Master was toward the end of Master's life, because he was only there for the last 3.5 years. But different disciples were leaving the ashram, because Master knew that he himself was going to be leaving before too long, and he needed to make sure that those who left were capable of carrying on without his physical presence. So he didn't really abandon disciples, but for some of them he allowed or encouraged them to move away from the ashram. So this man, who was a minister in charge of one of their churches, left at that period of time. His name was Smith. Still, from what he said about Smith, in answer to so when people would leave, the disciples would sometimes ask, when will he be back? And Master would say, oh, another lifetime, one lifetime and he'll come back, or next lifetime he'll come back, 3 lifetimes, whatever it might be. So when Smith left, from what he said about Smith in answer to someone's question, when will he be back? Master replied, never. He was never in. So there he was, he appeared to be as completely dedicated and part of the work as anyone else. But when he left, this was Master's answer. He was never in. So what level was Master talking about? He was obviously taken Kriya. He'd been initiated by Master himself, but Master said he was never in. So you have to realize to all who received him. And also from A.B. George, insisting that it was something very special when Master told a disciple, I give you my unconditional love. I've assumed that this was an extraordinary bond, not a universal one. As for sincere followers of this path, including, of course, you, I do think that you should know that you are in and accepted and have every right to believe it isn't just your presumption that you are his own, and that therefore his love for you is conditional. I'll finish reading the paragraph. But there are any number of people who don't feel that way in their hearts, but who think rather, oh well, if this doesn't work, I can always go elsewhere and try something else. But even some of them would really be Master's children in the sense that he'll never let go of them until they're out of this mess. I hope this answers you. Now, I have to just sort of put a few pieces into place here. I don't think I wrote this letter, but I don't think this is a letter from me, but it could have been, because I know I exchanged conversation with Swami on this point, and it's conceivable that I wrote a letter. I'm not trying to claim this letter. I'm just saying that the issues that Swami raised here. So when I saw this letter, reading before this evening and just going through it to look at it, let me think how to say this. I was surprised to find this letter in the book. There's a few letters in this book that I'm interested. I mean, Swami read the whole book and he wanted it here. So Swami carefully read this book. He had the manuscript when I was on holiday with him in Goa, I and many others, and he had the manuscript and he read through every word of it. It's quite conceivable that I typed his changes into it. So he knows that this is in here, and here's why. When Swami started talking about Master giving him his unconditional love, and he started talking exactly as he's written here, that this was a very special bond, and that not everyone, had a bond like that. I said to Swami, Swamiji, if you start saying that to a lot of people, it's going to be exceedingly disheartening for many, many people, because we all depend on the fact that Master has made an unconditional commitment to us. And if you start talking about the fact that maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I said, I think it's going to be very, very hard for people. And Swami's immediate response was, yes, that's true. And he was concerned about that, which is why I was surprised to see this letter in here, because there were things that Swamiji would say in private, but he wouldn't necessarily publish to the whole world. However, the fact that he decided to print it tells me that he wants this discussed. And it's partly, this line, that what made me think this might have been from me, which I don't know if it was or not, but just I'm sure I wrote to him and asked him, how can any of us be sure? And so he says, I do think you should know that you are in and you are accepted, that you have every right to believe it isn't your presumption that you are his own. And Swamiji would talked about this in terms of the way people, the way the relationship with Jesus is often portrayed in very narrow, rather fundamentalist ways, where the disciple can declare that I am saved. And Swamiji says that's presumptuous. The disciple can't declare that the Guru is going to save me. It has to be the Guru's commitment to the disciple. And of course, I recall discussing all of that with him too, about how it's very hard to really, it's very unnerving, because especially many people who choose a very fundamentalist path, they need to have that absolute iron promise that I'm saved. I've told you before about a young woman I saw in a coffee shop, just somewhere in America, and she was sitting in the coffee shop and she was reading her Bible, and her Bible was very well thumbed, and it had lots of, little stickers in it. You could tell that it was something she really worked with. And it was summertime, and she was wearing a tank top, and her back and shoulders were largely exposed. And she had a huge tattoo on her back with sort of Gothic letters, at least 3 inches high, and it said "redeemed," is what she had across her back. She had been saved by Jesus, and everything about her, including the size and the intensity of that tattoo, told me how important it was for her to feel that Jesus was committed to her, not merely that she was committed to Jesus. But Swami says, as a teaching, it's somewhat presumptuous, because we have to, how do I say that? Because we have to receive the Master. We can't just declare, oh yeah, he'll save anybody and now I'm saved. We have to constantly receive the Master's energy. But then Swami gives us a way to understand this. There are any number of people, okay, how does he say it? Oh, but there are any number of people who don't feel that way in their hearts, but who think rather, it isn't just your presumption that you are his own. It's the phrase that I was looking for. I belong to this path. I belong to this teaching. I know this is my teaching. And that's why it's not presumptuous, because the heart is completely dedicated to it, and there's no part that's still looking around. Think of it in human relationships. You can be partnered with somebody, but you're still looking to see if there's a better option out there. Or you can be partnered with someone and the door is closed and it's never going to open again, because this is my own, this is my destiny. So he says, in terms of, it's not a presumption to feel that I am his own. He says, and therefore, his love for you is unconditional, because I am committed, my love for him is unconditional. But there are any number of people who don't feel that way in their hearts, but who think rather, oh well, if this doesn't work, I can always go elsewhere and try something else. So we have to look into our own hearts and ask that question. I know sometimes people are afraid that they'll leave the path. I often hear that. People become frightened that they might get drawn away, that desire will take them away. And that is something that we have to consider. But being swept up into delusion in the sense of having desires take us over is a different question than actually wondering whether this is really where I belong. And I know, whether this was written to me or not, that I have been through over years. It's not that I ever had to fight for that understanding, and I will just say, by the grace of God, I never did. I met Swamiji, I recognized him, I've never looked back. I don't know whether doubt is in front of me or behind me, but I like to think it's behind me. So there's just a certainty of commitment. And that's what we have to ask ourselves, not, does he love me? But how deep is my commitment? Am I still shopping? Am I still thinking, well, there's a lot of things here I don't like. Maybe there's something better. Or do I say, it doesn't really matter? This is Peter's answer to Jesus when all the disciples were leaving. And I suppose I love this passage so much because it must have been my story at some point. When all the disciples, many disciples, were leaving Jesus because he was telling them to eat my body and drink my blood, and they thought, as the Bible says, I love it, this is a very hard teaching. And many walked with him no more. Now, you all have heard me talk about this, but I'm going to repeat it here. When you really think about the context as a human context there, these people had been following Jesus for a long time. Well, not for a long time because he was only there for 3 years. But Jesus, there was much more to the story than is in the Gospels, because they were Essenes together. There was many other things, but let's just say 3 years. And their lives had been transformed. They were following this master. He was magnificent. They were walking all over the country with him. He was, they were on the Sea of Galilee. They'd seen the miracles. Just so much had happened. But all of a sudden, it's shifted. All of a sudden, Jesus is making it hard. All of a sudden, he's saying these very strange things and not explaining it. The Bible is so terse. Just one little sentence or two, you can extrapolate. He's just become kind of loony all of a sudden. This is a very hard teaching. What the heck does this mean? From that point, many walked with him no more. People are leaving. So what you don't know is how many of Peter's best friends left. How many of the people that he'd come up together and they'd vowed to be together forever. I mean, maybe that was so, maybe it wasn't, but it could have been so. And that everything is shifting. So then when Jesus says that to Peter, I always hear it as Jesus asking it as a very open question, not as, will you also leave me? Which would just be impossible, or even disdainfully, are you going to leave too? None of that. What I think, and I'm just making this up, but this is how the question feels to me. Jesus just kind of leans over and says, Peter, what are you going to do? All these other folks have left. A lot of people, a lot of your friends are going. They kind of think I'm nuts. What are you going to do, Peter? The Bible puts it, will you also leave me? But there's no plaintive note in there. The language sounds like it could be a little plaintive, but I'm sure it wasn't. Couldn't possibly have been plaintive. It would just be more Jesus asking his disciple, where do you stand? And Peter took it as exactly. He said, where could I go? Lord, where could I go? You are my own. And Peter didn't explain what the teaching meant or anything like that, which implies to me that he was just as confused as everyone else. But where could I go? I belong to you. You belong to me. Where could I go? And then that's when the Master's love for you is unconditional. Because he can work with you then. He can help you because you've taken that step to accept him in your heart. But Swami does say, but even some of those who get drawn away would really be Master's children in the sense that he'll never let go of them until they're out of this mess. Now that's the saving grace in a lot of this, those lines. Because even if delusion sweeps us away and we lose track of our Master and we don't really know where we are, Master won't lose sight of us if we have really, with everything that we're capable of, given him our whole heart. Where he can't commit to that is when we ourselves are holding back our commitment. I remember there was this man who was in our community for a while, and he was a fine person, and he had a lot of magnetism and a lot of potential. He had a lot of strength, and Swami was hoping, but he got sucked into various other things, and I think he went to follow another path. And when he came to Swami to talk about leaving, there wasn't much Swami could or wanted to say, because the man wasn't receptive anymore. And he said, "Oh well, if Master doesn't want me to leave, he'll stop me." That's how he put it, sort of leaving. I must have been in the room, because after he walked out of the room, Swami turned to me and said, "Why would Master answer a prayer like that?" He said a prayer that just sort of challenges Master to interrupt my will, what I've already set out to do. He said, "That's not the prayer of a disciple. The prayer of a disciple says, 'Sir, how can I serve? What can I do? Show me how to love you.' It doesn't say, 'Well, I'm going to do this, and if you don't like it, then you better do something about it.'" It was just, Swami said, "Master won't answer a prayer like that." And I don't know if he really was Master's child, and Master is still waiting for him. I couldn't say. It's possible. Because of the way Swamiji tried to help him, it's quite possible. But what we really have to ask ourselves is, how much have I given to Master? How much have I really, truly in my heart, made this path my own? And if our longing and our love and our commitment is completely sincere, then of course Master will respond in kind. He can't help it. It's his nature to give. So my friends, thank you for spending this time with me, and we'll take a break from live broadcasts until January 12th. Have a blessed Christmas, a blessed New Year, and a deeply blessed Master's birthday on January 5th.